right, so we've got a couple of the different NVMe over Fabric options were talked about, and Praveen stole some of my thunder. I mean, I knew he would. We had this planned ahead, but Cavium offering both, you know, he's going to talk about both. And so there's a little bit of overlap here, but I'm at Brocade, and for the most part, we're focused on Fibre channel. The topics are, I'm going to talk a little bit about the spec, say a couple things that Praveen said and a couple he didn't, and interoperability and so on, and then I'll talk about dual protocol. So that's a little bit different model than you can get on the other fabrics because of the history, but there's a difference in, you know, why that's true as well. And then I'll talk about a demo that you would have been able to see tonight if we hadn't had some rainstorm in the hall. So hopefully you'll be able to see that tomorrow. But we're quite happy to have that true. Anyway, I'll tell you more about that when I get to that slide. So as Praveen said, the T11 meeting is going on right now. Back in December, actually, the FC NVMe spec went out for comments and so on, and most of those were expected to be resolved by this week, and so in fact they're going to talk about it at the T11 meeting and decide whether, you know, they can close it. And then it goes on to Insights, which is like a higher level body above T11, and that's where it's expected to go in the September-October timeframe. He also mentioned the UNH testing. Actually, it's been mentioned a couple times on multiple fabrics. That went on for FC NVMe. UNH testing happened in June. 12 vendors participated, and you know, a lot was learned and a lot of progress was made. There's another Plugfest coming in October, another UNH Plugfest, but as I'll show in a minute, well, I'll just go ahead here. So this is the fabric. They did a large fabric with lots of vendors plugging together and testing lots of different things. And a key point here is in that top line that it was running both FCP, which is actually SCSI on Fibre channel. FCP is an acronym for Fibre channel protocol, and it is an upper layer protocol that's focused on SCSI. As Praveen mentioned, you can actually also run FICON, which is a mainframe-oriented protocol. It's not SCSI based, and nowadays you can run NVMe right on top of Fibre channel. I don't think I have this in another slide, but a key point is that FC NVMe is not based on RDMA. So the decision was made. It wouldn't have mattered too much to those of us that are, you know, moving the packets around in the switch, but on the HBA side, that it would be easier to run dual protocol NVMe and SCSI without the RDMA, without choosing to go RDMA. So Fibre channel at the moment is the only fabric that is not RDMA based for NVMe. And there's now an investigation about potentially running it directly on TCP, but that's still in the early stages. Anyway, that's just a picture of the large fabric that was used at UNH for testing. There's independent of UNH, independently there's other Plugfests that are going on, just managed by vendors in the industry. And so, for example, we were hosting this Plugfest, which I think I think it's available at the FCIA booth, and I think it's hosted at Brocade. If it is, it may have survived the rainstorm a little bit better than the other options. I heard that, well, I'll get to that other vendor demo in a minute. But just mean to say that the interoperability is taken pretty seriously by the participants in the market. So moving on to the dual protocol topic, which is important for Fibre channel. So as Praveen mentioned, about 80% of the all-flash arrays are connected, and hybrid flash arrays that are used in enterprises are connected by Fibre channel. These flash arrays, they are used for the really high-value data assets. As Brandon had said at the beginning, there's a number of different storage sort of architectures or storage models. The kind of classic mainstream one that's been around the longest is the enterprise model. It's more conservative, it's typically more expensive, et cetera, but there's a number of other models as well. For those that are focused on the high end in that enterprise space, that pay a little extra, they're quite conservative. And this is where some of the benefits of dual protocol come into play. They're definitely a brownfield model. They want to migrate those high-value assets into whatever their future environment is. In greenfield cases, with new applications, new models, different rules may apply. But thinking again about those high-value assets that the enterprise storage teams are focused on, these guys are risk-averse. They go to great extents to avoid any potential data loss, and as a result, they plan carefully and they just tend to be risk-averse. The dual protocol SANs help reduce that risk. So dual protocol meaning NVMe and SCSI on the same SAN, and that means the same infrastructure, the same HBA, the same switches, typically different target ports, but potentially even the same targets. And the standard allows for mixing protocol even on a target port. But because optimizations on the target side may be different, it's likely to be in separate ports. So one of the benefits of running dual protocol SAN is that you get to leverage your existing infrastructure. So SANs that you buy today from Brocade, on the components that you buy today from Brocade or Cisco or Broadcom Emulex or Cavium QLogic, those products will support. They today support FCP SCSI, and they support in all those interop tests as well FC NVMe. So by using that same infrastructure, there's a lot less surprise, and it also translates to incremental migration models that I'll touch on in a minute. It also allows these enterprise storage teams to work with their existing vendors and rely on relationships that they're familiar with, which means that they're leveraging a shared vocabulary. Both sides really know what this means. They've known each other for years, and they have very trusted support models. They've typically bought a lot of the components through their storage vendor. That's where, for example, Brocade sells most of our products actually through the storage vendors. And so if something happens, they don't have to call two vendors. They can make a single phone call. And that trusted support model is very important to them. They also get to leverage, there's services that are built into the fiber channel fabric in a way that is not quite done the same way on the Ethernet side. Some of that is like under development on the Ethernet side, but it's been around for decades really in the fiber channel side, and they get to leverage that fabric-based services on the fiber channel side, which for the conservative groups is very valuable. And similarly, they get to leverage familiar tools and familiar expertise, and they don't have to start over with training and bringing things up again. So here's a graphic picture of what benefits you get from this. You can run your existing servers, existing applications, and existing HBAs, and connect to Gen 5 or Gen 6. Gen 5 is sort of an informal term. Gen 6 is actually a recognized term by FCIA. It means the 32 gig fiber channel. Gen 5 is the generation before. It's the 16 gig fiber channel. And I was told in an earlier presentation I couldn't say Gen 5 in our FCIA, the FCIA session, because it's not an FCIA approved acronym. But typically both the fabric vendors, Brocade and Cisco, support FC NVMe in the 16 gig and the Gen 6. Both the HBA vendors support it in Gen 6, and I think in the Cavium QLogic case, if you buy a Gen 5, you're now buying an enhanced Gen 5 that is using the Gen 6 silicon. So you get the benefits of the NVMe performance enhancement, and of course there's always going to be the performance one-upmanship that goes on with each of these fabrics. I was surprised to hear an acknowledgement that Rocky is probably slightly faster than I work. I think there's fairly general agreement about that, but not always get acknowledged. And in the case of fiber channel versus Ethernet, it's going to depend probably more on your underlying speed. So if you're running 16 versus 25, well then the Rocky's probably going to win. But if you're running 25 versus 32, well then the fiber channel is likely to win. And then they'll upgrade to 50, and then we'll upgrade to 64. So it's going to be a bit of a race in the raw speeds, and that's as it should be. I mean, if you're moving to NVMe, you care about performance, and so these competitions about speed matter. But that's not the only thing. So when you move to a dual protocol fiber channel SAN, you get the performance upgrade of going from SCSI to NVMe but you get to maintain a very straightforward migration model. You can migrate volume by volume. You can move a single volume within an application. So very often an application is complex. It might have a dozen or 24 volumes that are being used. You can move one at a time those volumes depending on different SLAs, service level agreements that may be supported by the different arrays. So if you have one that really values performance and you don't care so much about other enterprise features like snapshot or replication, et cetera, you might migrate that volume first. And you can do that on a volume by volume basis on a dual protocol SAN and maintain your legacy volumes on your legacy storage. And then over time, we imagine that probably everybody will eventually migrate into NVMe, but you get to do that on your own terms essentially. And then one of the aspects about being a conservative storage team is that you need to move sometimes during a migration. Something goes wrong, you have to go back. That's a very straightforward model to do in a dual protocol SAN, whereas if you're picking up all your volumes and moving them all to a whole other infrastructure, that's very disruptive, and the fallback model is much more complicated. What this translates to is that to migrate an application on a SAN like this, they can do incrementally, and they can do it kind of just blend it into their planning. To migrate to a whole other infrastructure, they're going to have to say, okay, we're going to look for a 3-day weekend, and it's going to be way out there, and we have to make sure it's not a time when we're doing other difficult thing and so on. So one thing just blends into their existing landscape, and the other one is very disruptive for those teams.
Okay, Curt, we got to wrap this one up, okay?